And it's an honor for me to be here. And I appreciate the work that you do. And I would not have been able to get, 3/4 of this information had it not been for the Trail of Tears Association and Stephen Neal Dennis and Dr. Hill and some other folks that led me in the right direction. Now, I'd been fascinated for years about Captain Buffington's company because I knew my 3 times great-grandfather, John Canita Latty, was in his company, but I didn't know very much about it. And so I had just, doing various general genealogical research. I had come across bits and pieces. And then I came across Dr. Hill's research project from 2005 and found some sources of information there I didn't know about. So from there I began to look. She put me in touch with Stephen, and I spent about 3 weeks there in Washington in the National Archives with his careful guidance. And so I came up with enough information to write this brief history. It was a really fascinating process. These records, are in the original form in the National Archives. I would never have found them if Stephen Dennis had not found them and directed me to them. But it was really fascinating to sit there and look at these original documents, 175 years old, still have the sand on them where they tried to dry up the ink and so forth. At the end of the day, you'd have that sand all over you looking at those documents. So it was a really interesting and a fulfilling experience. So now the reason I chose the name Carrying Off the Cherokee is because one of the militiamen in Buffington's company, when he was an elderly man, the pensions were not approved for these men until almost 50 years after their service. And so most of them were dead and gone. And the ones who were still around were elderly. And so they would, in the affidavits, when they'd apply for the pension, they would ask them what they were doing. And they asked this one old soldier, Major Wilbanks was his name. It wasn't his rank, it was his name. And he said as a young militiaman, he was busy carrying off the Cherokee. And so I thought that was an excellent title for the book because that's how they saw themselves, and their words and their descriptions far more important and better than mine. And so I have a little bit of information I want to share with you here, mostly from some original documents of what these men were doing. Now, Buffington's company was the 2nd Georgia Militia Unit, mounted militia unit called into service. The first one called into service for this work was Captain William Derrick from Lumpkin County, his company. The second one was Captain Buffington. Now, so there were what's called 2 services because they would muster in for 12 months. And so the only 2 units that served more than 12 months, so they had to muster more men in or re-enlist them, if you will, were those 2 companies. So my ancestor did not serve in the first service from December of 1836 to December 1837. He served in the second from December of 1837 to the time they mustered out here at Neochota in July of 1838. Now, when these men originally mustered in, they mustered in here at Neochota. They established quarters which later became Cantonment Wool and later Fort Wool here at Neochota. So in October of 1837, they were sent out to start forming the other forts, collection forts, or whatever you want to designate them. So Buffington's company, on October the 15th is when they arrived outside of Canton in Cherokee County on a plantation of a man named Moses Perkins. And there they established Cantonment Buffington, named after Captain Ezekiel Buffington, because he had been in the Georgia militia for many, many decades by this time. And they spent the rest of the time there. Now, it's my understanding, based on what I've been able to learn, that more Cherokee were rounded up and carried to Fort Buffington than any other post. Now, that may or may not be accurate, but Buffington said many years after the war in an affidavit that he had more than 1,300 Cherokee at Fort Buffington at one time. So this is a map of what was the last of the Cherokee Nation in the east as this process began. This original map, it don't say who drew it, but I'm convinced it was Keyes, a Lieutenant E.D. Keyes that was a cartographer for the Army and the Cherokee Nation. The original is in the collection at Cherokee, North Carolina, in the Museum of the Cherokee Indian. That was a great deal of fun to go there and spend time with those folks because I was usually the only one there. So I got a lot of attention. And so this shows, he even colored it a little bit, made a pretty drawing there, so you can see, and that my laser's not working. There we go. It designates Buffington's and Canton right there, and up here it shows Derrick's, which was in Ellijay, and then here is Fort Wool and New Echota. And so that dates the map because they had not established other forts, so it's probably late 1837, very early 1838. I really like that map so much so it's on the cover of the book. It's the background of the cover of the book. And Ezekiel Buffington, being from Hall County, in eastern Hall County, I like to say if you throw a rock, you're going to hit a Buffington about every third time. And this is where Ezekiel Buffington lived. They all still remember all this family history. This is the North Fork of the Oconee River. And there's a record of where Captain Derrick went to his home and visited him to discuss the formation of his militia company for this purpose, which was particularly interesting to me since I knew the area there. So, you know, as researchers and historians, we try to visualize, imagine and visualize what that area might have looked like. Of course, we really can't, other than huge fields, I'm sure, and farm buildings and so on. But he lived around the curve on top of the hill up there where you see that copse of trees there on the North Oconee in eastern Hall County. His legacy is pretty powerful around there. There's a Lebanon United Methodist Church and campground, and he and another man, as you see, gave the land for that church and the campground. They still meet there. I was there this past summer selling books. I didn't know you could do that at a Methodist camp meeting, but I did. Sold a bunch of them because half the people there were Buffingtons and their descendants. So anyway, they have this marker there commemorating him, so he's still widely known in that area today, even though he's been dead for 160 years. This is one of the original letters. Now, I don't expect you to be able to read it, but this is a letter that Buffington wrote to General Wool, as you see, November the 28th, 1836. And he has been notified by General Wool's staff that he needs to get him a company together to head to New Echota for this service. So he talks about it. He talks about the needs, whether or not he should get him a wagon for his baggage and his equipment, how soon they need to be there. He's looking for specific instructions and so forth on how to proceed. Now, I like his signature there. He always signed his name with that big E and Z there. You know, signatures supposedly tell us something about a person's personality, so I think you can gather something about Captain Buffington from his signature there. By the way, when Buffington died in 1859, he had more than 3,000 acres of land and about 50 slaves, and he was a powerful, influential man, had been in the inferior court of Hall County, as well as having been a colonel in the militia for a long time. Here's another letter that he sent to General Wool, December the 10th of 1836, and I just like that because it shows how they addressed him. It got a little fold there on the right, but he's addressing it to General Johnny Wool, as you see at New Echota, and he's sending him this letter, again, where he's asking for more specific information. He's saying here that agreeable to orders from Major Charles H. Nelson, I've engaged a company of mounted men to serve for 12 months in the Cherokee Nation, headquartered at New Echota, and am today to march at a minute's warning, and so on. So he's got his men organized, and he's ready to head for New Echota, which they did about December the 26th, about December the 22nd, because they arrived here on December the 26th. And this was from an old newspaper, Athens newspaper, from December the 10th, 1836. And I just stuck it in there because what a great source of information, you know, if you have those old newspapers and you find these things. This is the first company that was mustered in, and that was William E. Derrick's from Lumpkin County. And so it says, Lumpkin County Cavalry, as you see, this company, about 70 in number, under the command of Captain William E. Derrick. Lieutenant H.B. Shaw left this place on Sunday, that is Dahlonega, last for New Echota, Cass County, where it is expected they'll be mustered into the service of the U.S. for 12 months. The particular service designed for it is not known, but it's generally believed it'll be retained in the Cherokee country to aid, if necessary, in the removal of the Cherokees to the west. And it came from the Miners Recorder, which was there in Lumpkin County in Dahlonega. Love those old newspaper articles. They had a different way of expressing themselves then. And I just stuck these two in here because the first one up there is General Wool giving instructions on Captain Buffington's company when they arrive at New Echota, that they're to erect their winter quarters. On the left of Captain Derrick, he's already here, conforming or corresponding with the plan adopted by Captain Derrick. Officers' quarters on the wings with the whole front open for parades and maneuvers, training and so forth.